Top diplomats from Russia and the US met at Riyadh on Tuesday to discuss improving ties and negotiating an end to the war in Ukraine.
We're going to appoint a high-level team from our end to help negotiate and work through the end of the conflict in Ukraine in a way that's enduring and acceptable to all the parties engaged. The third point is to begin to work at a high level as well, to begin to discuss and think about and examine both the geopolitical and economic cooperation that could result from an end to the conflict in Ukraine. Obviously, we'd have to see that conflict come to a successful and enduring end in order for that to be possible.
The conversation was, I think, very useful. We did not just listen but heard each other. And I have reason to believe that the American side has become more understanding of our position, which we have once again presented in detail with specific examples on the basis of President Putin's multiple statements.
Подробно на конкретных примерах изложили в очередной раз.
Earlier in the day, while the talks were going on, Moscow reiterated its stand on Ukraine's NATO membership possibilities.
We have already addressed this issue during last briefing. Let me repeat it again. Ukraine's membership in NATO, I have even talked about it just now, but once again is unacceptable for us. This poses serious threats to our security and will lead to catastrophic consequences for the whole Europe. At the same time, it is worth noting that the refusal to accept Kyiv into NATO now is not enough. The alliance must disavow its Bucharest promises of 2008, according to which Ukraine was guaranteed membership in the North Atlantic bloc in the future. Otherwise, this problem will continue to poison the atmosphere on the European continent.
A day before, at the UN, the Russian envoy also remained unbending in his stand that Ukraine has irreversibly lost Crimea and 4 other regions that are partially controlled by Russia. The Kremlin refuses to engage with European countries with regards to Ukraine conflict.
Today we realize that the guarantors of the Minsk agreements and generally the European Union countries and the UK are totally unable to negotiate and cannot be a part of any future agreement aimed at the settlement of the Ukrainian crisis. They are blinded by primitive Russophobia, their maniacal desire to inflict defeat on our country on the battlefield using the Ukrainians who are still left alive.
Russia cleared that while it was Ukraine's sovereign right to decide whether it wanted to join the European Union and that Moscow did not intend to dictate to Kiev how it should approach the question, but when it comes to security and defense, they refuse to budge. While the question of a stable peace formula still remains far away, the Russian Sovereign Wealth Fund chief believed that the thaw in the relationship between Moscow and Washington has been possible because of the US president, as he is the problem solver.
Well, I would say it's a long road ahead, many differences, we need to manage expectations, but this dialogue of two, strategic powers in the world is very important, and the world is a much safer place now when this dialogue started to happen. So we'll have to see how it evolves over time, but definitely a very positive start. And by the way, Saudi played a really key role in providing good opportunity for this dialogue.
One word, what is Russia going to compromise on?
Again, I think it's too early to say. Thank you.
The US and Russia have agreed to restaff their respective embassies in Washington and Moscow and appoint high-level teams to continue negotiations. Bureau Report, India Today.
Well, the lines have been divided when it comes to Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine and European nations were left out of the Riyadh talks that took place between the United States of America and Russia. But Ukraine is determined that it will not be a part of any peace process unless and until it's in the room. And for the European countries, they're now resolute to increase their budgets and ensure that Ukraine has enough to defend itself against Russia.
Cloud of white smoke rose over Ukraine's capital, Kiev. The war goes on. Ukraine's military said Russia launched a barrage of 147 attack drones overnight, out of which 83 was shot down. The Caspian Pipeline Consortium in the Russian export terminal port said Ukrainian drones hit one of its main oil pipelines in a southern Russian pumping station in the Krasnodar region. It affected supply from neighboring Kazakhstan. The Ukrainian president reached Turkey to discuss ways to improve cooperation and bilateral ties. He hopes for a call or invite in the peace talks going on close by in Saudi Arabia.
Україна не братиме. Україна про це нічого не знала.
Ukraine will not take part. Ukraine did not know anything about them. Any negotiations on Ukraine without Ukraine as ones that have no result. And we cannot recognize anything. Any agreements about us made without us and will not recognize such agreements.
Будь-які домовленості про нас без нас. І ми не будемо такі домовленості визнавати.
At stake is not only Ukraine but also Europe and the United Kingdom, countries who have stood by Ukraine in the past 3 years since the war started. European leaders met in Paris on Monday. At the same time, the French President Emmanuel Macron first spoke to the US President Donald Trump over the phone and then with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
It is now very clear to us that we must continue to support Ukraine, and it can rely on us that this will be the case. We welcome the fact that there are talks on peace development, but it must be and is clear to us this does not mean that there can be a dictated peace and that Ukraine must accept what is presented to it. In this respect, we are working very closely with Ukrainian President and Ukraine as a whole on these issues.
Russia is not only a threat against Ukraine but all of us. So we need to scale up and we need to speed up, and to do that we need also a discussion in the European Union about the fiscal rules. Then of course we had a long discussion about Ukraine, and what I would like to say now, and it maybe sounds a bit strange, but a ceasefire is not it's not automatically peace. So we really have to ensure that Ukraine have the best possible outcome of negotiations whenever they start, but also starting point, and that means more donations and more weapons right now.
The United Kingdom went a step ahead to offer leadership for the European countries, including a peacekeeping force in Ukraine for a lasting peace.
On defence, it's clear the US is not going to leave NATO. But we Europeans will have to do more. The issue of burden sharing is not new, but it is now pressing. And Europeans will have to step up, both in terms of spending and the capabilities that we provide. Europe must play its role. And I'm prepared to consider committing British forces on the ground, alongside others, if there is a lasting peace agreement.
The fate of the war inching close to its third anniversary hopes for peace to return, while world leaders are busy finding a solution that is agreeable to all. Bureau Report, India Today.
The Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim, came calling last evening and was received by none other than Prime Minister Narendra Modi himself. A significant move when it comes to India-Qatar relations. There were bilateral agreements that were signed on various fronts, including one to do with GCC countries, as also a free trade agreement. But more importantly, it's the elevation of relations between the two countries that has been elevated to strategic partnership is of significant importance, while there are other areas that are of concern, even including the 8 naval officers, of which one of them still is in Qatar. Shivani Sharma with this report.
The Prime Minister of India was at the airport to welcome the Emir of Qatar for his second visit to India since 2015.
The Prime Minister Sri Narendra Modi paid his second visit to Qatar in February 2024. He had invited His Highness the Emir to pay a state visit to India at that time.
Next day at the bilateral talks, India and Qatar exchanged two agreements. A revised agreement for avoidance of double taxation and prevention of fiscal evasion with respect to taxes on income between India and Qatar was one, while the other agreement was that of 7.5 metric tons LNG for India for 20 years starting 2028.
India and Qatar share a very vibrant partnership in the area of energy. Qatar is a major source of LNG for India. Both leaders today noted that in February 2024, Qatar Energy and Petronet LNG Limited had signed an agreement for supply of 7.5 million metric tons per annum of LNG from Qatar to India for 20 years starting 2028. Both leaders also discussed ways to further strengthen and broaden the energy partnership, including exploring mutual investments. 2 agreements and 5 memorandums of understanding have been signed during the state visit of His Highness the Amir.
While the two leaders of the two countries discussed geopolitics and strategy, the issue of Commander Purnendu Tiwari's release was also discussed.
The case of 8 naval veterans had become a major diplomatic issue between India and Qatar after they were arrested in August 2022 and later sentenced to death by a Qatari court on undisclosed charges. Following intense diplomatic efforts and direct intervention by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Qatar granted pardon, leading to the release of all 8 veterans. However, 7 of them were repatriated to India, while Commander Purnendu Tiwari still remains in Qatar in a separate legal matter.
Fortunately, we have some of our people who are in jail. The number at this moment is around 600. And from time to time, we do see Qatari leadership granting pardons and releases them from their terms. About 85 Indians received such pardon during 2024. Regarding the Navy official who is still over there, I would like to just mention that his matter still remains sub judice in the local courts in Qatar.
Though it will take time for the retired naval officer's case to settle, what was settled for sure is the fact that the annual trade of $14 billion between India and Qatar is going to double in the next 5 years. With Shivani Sharma in Delhi, Bureau Report, India Today.
Joining me now to discuss more on the Qatar-India relations and the impact on West Asia is Dr. Hassan Al-Hassan. He's a senior fellow at IISS. Hassan, thank you so much for joining us here on India Today. Let's begin with the fact that there has been an elevation of relationship to strategic partnership between India and Qatar. What's the significance of that? What does it really mean when we see this kind of elevation between Qatar and India?
The raising of India's relationship with Qatar to the level of strategic partnership is a significant symbolic step in the direction of elevating that bilateral relationship. India has a number of pre-existing strategic partnerships in the region, including with Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iran, Egypt, and others. Very often, these strategic partnerships are important on the symbolic level. They can materialize in different ways with different countries. So sometimes these strategic partnerships take on a very concrete significance in terms of raising investments for both sides, in terms of upgrading defense and security ties. And in other instances, they're mostly a symbolic gesture. And so the question of whether the elevation of the India-Qatar relationship to a strategic partnership is going to be truly and practically meaningful is something that remains to be seen. I think Qatar matters for India, or matters to India for a number of reasons. It hosts a significant number of Indian workers and expatriates, around 850,000. As a result, it's a very significant source of inward remittances for India. It's India's 8th largest source of remittances. And then, of course, there's the energy relationship, which is also very significant. And so Qatar has traditionally been one of India's largest suppliers of LNG and has recently signed a long-term agreement to continue supplying India with LNG, liquefied natural gas, for a few decades to come. And there's, of course, the fact that Qatar is a rich nation, it's a capital abundant nation, and India is obviously interested as well in attracting capital flows and investments from Qatar through Qatar's sovereign wealth fund, the Qatar Investment Authority, and other state-owned enterprises. And so Qatar is also an interesting partner from an investment perspective for India. So I think it's primarily about energy, it's about investments, and it's about the Indian diaspora. Qatar doesn't matter very much for India at the moment from a defense and security perspective. Those ties are still quite nascent. They're not very much developed yet, but this is perhaps an area in which we can expect to see some growth in the future.
It seems like when it comes to energy security, India is looking at Qatar as well. There has been another agreement that we are looking at in terms of energy supplies and security. Qatar is one of the largest supplier of LNG. $78 billion deal was signed only last year. What is your reading on energy security and where it's headed with Qatar?
I think energy is going to be and will continue to be a very significant pillar of the India-Qatar relationship. From the Indian perspective, securing a reliable supply of energy, of natural gas, is going to be very critical to ensure India's continued economic growth. Natural gas is very important because it's a transition fuel for the Indian economy. It's a cleaner source of energy than, say, biofuels or coal. And so ensuring reliability of supply from a country like Qatar, which has proved to be extremely reliable as a global provider of LNG, is going to be very important for India from an energy security perspective. Conversely, for Qatar, ensuring that Qatar has long-term contracts is also very significant because for a country like Qatar to sink investments into its energy sector, it needs to have the assurance that it will be able to sell the returns on these investments, the natural gas, for many years to come at stable prices. And obviously, gas is Qatar's main commodity export. It's the main and most important source of economic activity and government revenue in Qatar. So I think this is a relationship that works, an equation that works for both sides. India needs a reliable and secure access to natural gas. Qatar needs a reliable long-term market for its natural gas. So I think this is going to be a very important pillar of this relationship. And then there's, of course, the other important elements that I mentioned, including investments, diasporic ties, trade, and others.
In terms of concerns and niggling areas between the two countries, the 8 naval officers case still is not completely over. Of the 8, one still remains in Qatar. How do you think that impacts bilateral relations? Because this is an area that could very well impact bilateral relations, given that the allegations are very serious. It has to do with espionage.
So I think the issue of the Indian officers who have been sentenced to death for espionage charges relating to allegations of spying for Israel, I think started out as being an irritant to the India-Qatar relationship. But interestingly, I think India's high-level approaches to the Qatari government and the Qatari government's decision to release most of these accused Indian officers, I think has rather become somewhat of a diplomatic success story between the two sides. The issue here, I think the broader issue, is whether India and Qatar have the ability to resolve disputes in a way that is mutually respectful, diplomatic, behind closed doors, avoiding media sensationalism. I think both sides have proved capable of doing that because with the kinds of relationships, the people-to-people ties that Qatar and India enjoy, it's inevitable that issues surrounding people will come up every once in a while. But I think what matters at the end of the day is the ability of these two countries to resolve such differences diplomatically. And I think that so far they've proved capable of doing so.
Dr. Hassan Al-Hassan, thank you so much for joining us here on India Today. Well, after the big meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Elon Musk in Washington, D.C., it does seem like Tesla is looking at hiring in India. Job hirings have opened up after years of roadblocks that Tesla hit here trying to enter the Indian market. It seems like now they're looking at India. How will they really come into India? What's at play over here? Here's a report that breaks it down for you.
It was just 5 days ago that Tesla CEO Elon Musk met Prime Minister Narendra Modi at Washington, D.C. There were no customary comments from the world's richest man after the meeting. But it's now clear that Donald Trump's influencer-in-chief has rubbed some of his magic on PM Modi. 9 years after it first planned to drive into India with the Tesla 3 model, the electric vehicle pioneer has rekindled its India dreams by advertising for 13 job positions in Mumbai. The positions include that of a store manager to oversee Tesla showroom, service technicians for maintenance and repair services, sales representatives to boost sales, software engineers for local tech support, and development and charging infrastructure specialists to enhance the EV charging network across India. This apparent approval for Tesla, both for vehicles and possibly satellites, marks a significant policy shift, reflecting a strategic move to attract high-tech industries, fostering an ecosystem where Tesla could potentially set up manufacturing, leveraging the incentives offered for substantial investment. Tesla's latest effort to crack the Indian market have been fueled by the proposal to reduce import duties in Budget 2025. Tesla could also leverage the scheme to promote manufacturing of electric passenger cars in India policy, where companies investing over 4,150 crore rupees can benefit from reduced duties and taxes. The policy also encourages companies to slowly increase local production. Meanwhile, Tesla's drive into India has not been smooth. It first expressed interest in the Indian market in 2016 and even began bookings for the Model 3. But the plans were scrapped in the face of high duty and infrastructure issues. In 2019, Tesla again began talks which fell flat again. There was progress in 2021 when Tesla registered its subsidiary in Bengaluru. But a year later, talks failed when Tesla failed to import duty concessions. It was only after a meeting between Elon Musk and Prime Minister Modi in June 2023 that Tesla began to revive its plans. Last year in January came reports that the company was considering a $30 billion investment in India over 5 years to develop a new, cheaper car model for developing countries. And with the latest meeting between the two, seemingly opening the door for Tesla in India. Parallel to his automotive pursuits, Elon Musk has been pushing for his satellite internet Starlink in India. He, however, faces tough resistance due to the spectrum allocation issues. However, recent policy adjustments hint at an administrative approach potentially easing Starlink's possible entry. Meanwhile, there is speculation that Musk's entry into the country may also help India in its case against reciprocal tariff announced by the United States of America. Bureau Report, Business Today Television.
That's all in this edition of World Today. We'll keep bringing you all the latest updates and news developments from across the world at 10:30 p.m. every weekday. But for now, it's goodbye and take care.